October 28th, 1944. What happens this week? This week comes the largest naval battle in history. Is World War II. Last week, the Germans engineered a coup in Hungary that kept Hungary in the war on their side. The Soviets liberated Belgrade, and the Western Allies took Aachen, the first large German city to fall. And on the other side of the world, Vinegar Joe Stilwell was recalled from China. There were American air raids on the Philippines, and then the Americans made landings on Leyte. As I mentioned, when the Japanese learned the 17th those landings were to happen, they put a plan in motion to destroy the landing ships and transports. But moving a navy around takes time, and their battleships and cruisers were near Sumatra, and the carriers were at home on the inland sea. This all means they don't arrive to the Philippines until the 24th. 4 days after the landings. And the Americans by then have already sent away much of their shipping and established headquarters ashore. But what they have in the Gulf of Leyte, or near it at any rate, are a few dozen cargo ships, a similar number of LSTs, 6 old battleships, and a variety of cruisers and destroyers. That's elements of 7th Fleet, the covering force, and there are a bunch of escort carriers attached. Takeo Kurita is commander of the center force of the Japanese fleet. And on the 23rd, they're passing Palawan Island after refueling at Brunei. A pretty powerful force. Kurita has Yamato and Musashi, the 2 super battleships, plus 3 older battleships and 10 heavy cruisers. Kurita has a cruiser as his flagship and is leading the way. 2 American subs, though, have managed to sight his force, and they sink 2 cruisers and damage a 3rd one. Kurita actually has to swim to safety after losing his flagship. This also alerts 3rd Fleet Commander Bull Halsey that the Japanese are really coming in force, which for a change the Americans did not already know, since recently the Japanese have changed naval codes, and they've also been maintaining radio silence. The 24th, Center Force hits the Philippines below Luzon, aiming for the San Bernardino Strait and then south to Leyte Gulf. Meanwhile, a 2nd Force under Jisaburo Ozawa has arrived from Japan. This is 4 carriers, which are very nearly empty of planes, 2 old battleships, and 3 light cruisers. They're sitting around northeast of Luzon as bait to lure Halsey's carrier armada away from the center force. A 3rd force under Shoji Nishimura is coming from the Mindanao Sea and planning on reaching Leyte Gulf through the Surigao Strait. 2 battleships and 1 heavy cruiser. Behind him is a 4th force of 1 light and 2 heavy cruisers under Kiyohide Shima. And escorting the Japanese forces is 31 destroyers. If the 3 non-decoy forces can link up and the American carriers take the bait and they move off, the Japanese could just devastate the American shipping in the Gulf covering the landings. Halsey is aboard battleship New Jersey, his flagship northeast of Luzon. But guess what? You know all those raids we've seen the past few weeks against places like Formosa? Well, after all that, he sent 2 of his 4 carrier task groups to Ulithi, with 2 of his attack carriers also along. When he learns of Center Force, he recalls them, and 1 of them arrives before the 24th. See, he has thought the Japanese wouldn't interfere with the Leyte landings, but would wait for ones on Luzon. He is wrong. The morning of the 24th, American scout planes find Center Force in the Sibuyan Sea, and Halsey sends out 2 of his carrier groups to attack. The 3rd is itself under attack by Japanese land-based planes from Luzon. The two groups attacking Center Force managed to gather 251 planes. They make 4 waves of attacks, focusing primarily on the gigantic super battleships, with Yamato now Kurita's flagship. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 torpedoes and 17 bombs in total hit Musashi, and explosions in its engine room flood the boilers and cause it to lose power. It falls out of formation and eventually sinks. Yamato is hit by bombs that penetrate the hull, but it survives. Cruiser Miyoko is hit pretty bad and returns to Brunei. Kurita withdraws, but later in the day resumes course for a nighttime race through San Bernardino Strait. The scout planes also find Nishimura's group heading for the Mindanao Sea the morning of the 24th, and then airstrikes damage both of his pre-World War I dreadnought area battleships. Kurita has been begging Japanese command for aerial support the whole day, but instead they launched their land-based planes against that third carrier group that I mentioned. That's 3 attacks of like 60 planes each time. Defending planes just demolished them, but one plane manages to drop a bomb right through the light carrier Princeton's flight deck, setting off explosions and fires. Eventually, this sets off the weapons store and blows up Princeton's stern, sending chunks of debris onto the deck of light cruiser Birmingham. Princeton is later scuttled by torpedoes, and Birmingham sent home for repairs. At 4:40 p.m. the 24th, American scout planes finally find the decoy force of carriers and battleships as intended. Halsey orders his groups to gather and head north along the Luzon coast by night to attack them in the morning. Meanwhile, around midnight, Center Force clears the strait and heads south along the coast of Samar. Halsey thinks they've been diminished to the point that Tom Kincaid's 7th Fleet can handle them. Halsey was not there for the fleet-on-fleet battles like Midway and the Coral Sea, so this is actually his first fleet-on-fleet engagement. However, despite his inexperience, Halsey was a critical player in the transformation of naval warfare occurring at this moment. He had been the one to attack the Japanese air forces on the Okinawa, Formosa, Philippines island chain, hammering at them so long and hard that even Japanese carrier trainees were transferred to the islands, leaving nearly empty carriers for Ozawa to bring to the Philippines as sacrificial lambs. The Japanese Navy could no longer muster the fuel, ammunition, and trained pilots to conduct battle. All it could attempt to do was inflict maximum damage on the American forces. The following day, the 25th, thus begins the era of kamikaze warfare. But the fleet battle begins at 10:50 p.m. the night of the 24th. Nishimura enters the Surigao Strait. 39 torpedo boats harass him over the next few hours, but fail to do any damage. And the main action of the Battle of Surigao Strait starts at 3 a.m. in the narrowest part of the strait, the American ships deployed in lines awaiting their enemy. The lines launch 47 torpedoes in waves. Battleship Fuso is hit and hit bad and sinks within the hour. 3 of Nishimura's 4 destroyers are hit, and all 3 are sunk before morning. But the smoke, the radar clutter, and enemy counterfire prevent any more sinking, and Nishimura plows ahead towards Leyte Gulf, knowing that Shima's force is catching up. But Nishimura is actually in deep trouble. At 3:51 a.m., 4 heavy and 4 light cruisers of the 7th Fleet open fire. The 6 battleships behind them open fire shortly after. They are heading in lines west to east and back, crossing the T so that all guns can be brought to bear against an enemy that can only use forward guns. It's actually a pretty poorly executed maneuver this time, but it still has effect. Battleship Yamashiro is on fire, then a torpedo hits its engine room. Nishimura sends out the message, "We proceed to Leyte for total annihilation." And then his flagship takes another torpedo, capsizes and sinks. Of the crew of 1,600, 10 survive. The Japanese cruiser and destroyer left head back into the Mindanao Sea. The former will sink within hours. Shima figures he'll get what Nishimura got if he stays course, so he turns around and heads south. Kurita's force leaves the San Bernardino Strait, and then around dawn, about 130 kilometers from the entrance to Leyte Gulf, his scouts spot American carriers. They also spot his force. Both sides are surprised. The American force is an escort carrier group of 6 attached to 7th Fleet, backed by 3 destroyers, Taffy 3. The carriers have a decent-sized air force altogether, but if they don't get them into the air, they are doomed against superior Japanese speed and firepower. Taffy 3 commander Ziggy Sprague starts launching planes as fast as he can, though they don't have any armor-piercing bombs to take out battleships. He turns the carriers south, orders all ships to make smoke, which lays low on the water, and orders the destroyers to attack with torpedoes. So they race towards the 6 enemy heavy cruisers and 4 battleships beyond them. They lay spreads of torpedoes, which not only force evasive actions that wreck the Japanese formation, but a hit and a near-miss explosion forced 2 cruisers to withdraw. Kurita is now down from 10 cruisers on the 23rd to 4 now. Admiral Kurita was slow to bring his full power to bear on the enemy. In this, his first encounter with escort carriers, his lookouts took them for the fast carriers of Halsey's fleet. Furthermore, the American destroyers, though half the size, had a silhouette quite similar to that of the current American heavy cruisers. Holding this image of fast carriers and heavy cruisers, Kurita may have failed to realize that the enemy was much slower, thereby providing him with an opportunity to close fast and sink the carriers before an organized air attack arrived. Still, by 9 a.m., the Japanese are closing in. The American destroyers go out again, but they've had it. 3 soon go down. However, Felix Stump's Taffy 2 is by now nearby, and he's also launched a lot of planes. The American air power makes itself felt, damaging 2 more cruisers. Kurita is down to 2. And then, to the great surprise of the Americans, Kurita's ships, bearing down on Taffy 3, ships that will surely destroy it, turn around and head off. Why? Well, in the past 48 hours, he's swum for his life from a sinking ship. He's faced hours of aerial attacks, all while recovering from dengue fever. His force is currently under heavy aerial attack, and he may well have the mental picture that the ships he's sunk are major capital ships. A variety of sources say he does think he's fighting full 3rd Fleet carriers. He also could have gotten word about Nishimura's loss and Shima's withdrawal, though Japanese communications here are terrible, so maybe not. I'll quote Implacable Foes one more time. Building in Kurita's mind were 3 convictions. First, evidently the Americans were using the Tacloban and Dulag airfields on Leyte, and thus were already established on the island and capable of defending their beachhead. Second, to enter the Gulf would threaten his force with entrapment. He had no knowledge of what size force the Americans had in the Gulf, and in the Gulf he would lack room to maneuver. Third, he concluded that given his assumptions on American strength, he would not be able to inflict on the enemy losses great enough to justify his own. But he isn't a lone wolf, right? It's sacrifices by other elements of the fleet, like the carriers, that are to allow him to enter Leyte Gulf and destroy American transports and shipping there. But he does not take that responsibility and will head back for San Bernardino Strait. There's a little more to it than that, but Kurita will later say, I did not know that Admiral Halsey had taken his fleet to the north. I moved only with the knowledge that I was able to acquire with my own eyes, and did not realize how close I was to victory. As for Halsey's armada and its mission to destroy Ozawa's carriers, ahead of his 5 full and 5 light carriers, he has a group of 6 fast battleships, 2 heavy and 6 light cruisers, and 18 destroyers. 5 more carriers are also en route to join them. At dawn the 25th, scout planes spot the enemy. 2 airstrikes sink a light carrier and set another one on fire. Suddenly, at 11:15 though, Halsey orders the battleship force to turn around and head back, leaving the carrier groups and cruisers and destroyers. Why? Well, 7th Fleet has been sending increasingly desperate-sounding messages to Halsey. They want to make sure that San Bernardino Strait is covered and think that this is Halsey's fleet's job. Well, Willis Lee's fast battleship force under Halsey's job, anyhow. The messages begin with request, and then they move on to urgent, and then where is Lee? Send Lee. And then Pacific Ocean Area Commander Chester Nimitz himself sends to Halsey, where is Task Force 34? Taffy 34 is the battleship force. Halsey curses and swears but orders the ships turned around. But Kurita beats the battleships to the strait by 3 hours. Mark Mischer's carrier planes meanwhile wreak great havoc on Ozawa's ships, sinking all 4 carriers by the end of the 25th. The Japanese battleships are damaged, but they and the cruiser escape to Japan. Still, for the overall Battle of Leyte Gulf, all these battles together, Surigao Strait, Samar, Cape, and Ganyo, the Japanese lose 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers for over 300,000 tons. In terms of total displacement of ships used or displacement of ships sunk, it's the largest naval battle in history, though not in simple number of ships involved. The battle has absolutely crippled the Japanese Navy and opened the China Sea to American maneuvers. There have been plenty of mistakes made on the American side, yes, and communications issues and hassles, but the American Navy simply proved more capable. However, I did mention the kamikaze era beginning, and indeed it does. For the 25th and the 26th, kamikaze planes hit ships of Taffy 1 and Taffy 3. In Taffy 3, the escort carrier St. Louis is sunk, and 2 more are so badly damaged they have to return to the States and will not return. In Taffy 1, 4 escort carriers are damaged, and 3 of them have to head to the States for repairs. So, his Navy might be unable to fight battles anymore, but it can still sure do a lot of damage. As for the actual landings on Leyte, on the 22nd, the invaders pushed forward with 7th Division advancing the most towards Abuyog. The 24th, elements of 1st Cavalry Division crossed the San Juanico Strait from Tacloban to Samar. Today, the 27th, the 7th Division takes Buri Airfield. But here's the thing. The Japanese are heavily reinforcing Leyte, and what's left of the Japanese Air Force has been flying into the Philippines from all of the Japanese inner islands, and Japanese Commander Shiro Makino, who has been withdrawing into the mountains, is expecting to very much use air power for his counterattack.